Hi everyone, welcome back to CSharpCorner live show. I'm your host Stephen Simon, and we are back with another episode of Ask Me Anything. And if you see this number of your screen, we have reached episode number 28. And it's been a really, I think we have been doing live shows all through this pandemic. And if you are someone who is joining us for the very first time, do live shows every day at 10 a.m. Eastern. On Monday, we have Azure AI show. On Tuesdays, we have Coffee with Pros. On Wednesdays, we have C Sharp Corner MVP show, where we feature some of our community leaders where they share their journey and followed by a technical session. Then on Thursday, we do Ask Me Anything, 10 a.m. Eastern. On Friday, we do Growth Mindset. And on Saturday, we do Rock in the Code World with .NET Dave, and sometimes we do virtual conferences too. So that's our schedule for all week. We also do on Sundays. So you may say that we stream 8 days in a day. Sometimes we even do a couple of live shows in a day. So 8 live shows in a week. And today's show is gonna be really, really exciting. When I got that title on my email that said full stack web and service with .NET and .in, I was like, .NET should always come with Blazor. Where did someone know to plug in? So I'm really excited for this show. For this episode, we have with us Rob Richardson, who says he's a software craftsman building web properties in ASP.NET and Node. He also has a sound knowledge in React and Vue, which is very, very exciting. He is a Microsoft MVP, published author, frequent speaker at conferences, user group, community events, and I don't know how to read that word. Digent teacher. I don't know. My English is bad. And a student of high quality software development. Let's go ahead and invite Robert Richardson. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Sorry, Rob. I just messed up your bio. that's
Not to
some
worry.
really, that's some really good Oxford English coming in there.
Yeah,
So,
I'm
so
so glad
Rob,
to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. We are more than happy that you accepted our invitation. Thank you so much for your time. And Rob, before we go ahead and talk about all this topic today, why don't you go ahead and give a quick introduction about? I did read the bio, but still a quick introduction about who you are, what you do, and how does your day look like as a software craftsman.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting that I have joined both the Node community and the .NET community. Usually when we look at software development, it's like, oh, I'm a Python developer and I'm just going to stick in my lane. Or I'm a C# developer and I'm just going to stick here. I really like that I've joined multiple tribes, for lack of a better term. And I think that gives me insight in being able to see what things other communities do really well that we can bring to the .NET community. And that's what I'm excited to share today. We're going to build a full stack app in .NET, so no JavaScript at all. And then we're going to build a parallel app that functions exactly the same, purely in JavaScript. And so getting to compare and contrast those two will be really, really fun. What does a Blazor app look like with gRPC with only .NET? And then what does a Vue app look like with gRPC only in JavaScript? It'll be fun to compare and contrast these solutions.
Yeah, this sounds so interesting. And I think if I just go in and search on the internet, you will not find any such content like this because this is very unique, right? So, and when I say that, Rob, I have a very quick question that strikes me that with so much of diversity, right? You are adding this .NET thing with Node and then gRPC with Vue.js. The quick question that I get is that is this something that comes out of your hobby, or even people try to use this in the production or development? How
I
does
think
that
I'm
work?
blessed that my hobbies are my profession.
Mhm.
And so I've been a student of JavaScript for some time and gotten to wander into the Vue world and the React world and really gotten to dig in deep there. As my clients or my projects need it, then I can definitely pull in these skills. So I've been able to build some production Vue apps. I've been able to do some great experiments in Blazor. I've been able to build production C# web API apps and leverage Swagger and OpenAPI to be able to do really interesting things there. They started out of hobbies and experiments, grew into conference talks and proof of concepts, and ultimately flourished as production apps.
Wow, that's great. So that means when you go ahead and say that you're going to build a Vue.js application that also has gRPC, so it means the application would be mature enough that we can go ahead and put it on production. Is that right thing to
Exactly.
say? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. That's really interesting. So Rob, I know you are a Microsoft MVP. You go ahead and talk in many conferences, local events. You write blog, but who is actually an MVP? Is a Microsoft MVP an employee at Microsoft who works for them? Because we usually see Microsoft MVPs advocating Microsoft technologies. So when I go ahead and read your profile to someone who doesn't understand Microsoft MVP, so what does one should think that, hey, is Microsoft MVP? What does that mean?
Yeah, good question. What is a Microsoft MVP? A Microsoft MVP is definitely not a Microsoft employee, but rather a community member who has provided excellent service throughout the year. Microsoft MVP is a service award for those people who contribute to the community. So I got my Microsoft MVP because I like giving conference talks and teaching. And so I was able to teach a lot in the community. Fellow Microsoft MVP noticed and submitted me, and I was chosen. What does it take to become a Microsoft MVP? I really don't know either. It's intentionally vague. And so for some reason I fell in. Someday I'm going to fall out and I'm not sure. But I really love serving the community. I love being able to lead user groups and conference sessions. And I guess that qualified me. So if you want to become an MVP, go be awesome in the community. And if you love being able to share and grow in that way, then in time, your passion will get noticed and you become a Microsoft MVP as well. It's not something you can campaign for. It's not something you need enough votes for. It's a service award. It's an award for philanthropy to the community.
Wow, yeah, definitely. I see no votes coming in, so definitely you're joining us from United States, right? So I see
Yeah.
that election thing coming up. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. All right, so I think let's get to the topic now. So everyone who's watching, if you have any questions throughout, any questions that if Rob is presenting, you can go ahead and drop in the comments, and we will pick up your questions. All questions that are asking. It doesn't have to be technical. It can be any question. It can be a career-related question. It's okay. Just keep your questions coming up, and I'll make sure that Rob answers every single question.
Yeah,
All right,
most
Rob, so
definitely.
I'm gonna pull your screen, and there you go.
Great. This is definitely a talk that I love giving, but your questions are much more important than the content that I have. So by all means, if you have a question, jump in. Let's talk about what you'd like to talk about rather than what I have to say. Here's my thing where we'll talk about a full stack .NET app, no JavaScript involved at all. And we'll also talk about a full stack JavaScript app with no .NET at all. And then we'll start to mix and match those. You can grab these slides from robrich.org right now. Head over to robrich.org, click on presentations here at the top. And here's your technology your way. You can get to the slides. You can also get to the code. Here's the code that's up on GitHub. And this code up on GitHub is available right now. Both the C# content and the Node content is available right now. While you're here on robrich.org, you can click on About Me and see some of the things that I've done recently. We've talked through these, and so I won't belabor that. But I do want to highlight AZ Give Camp. AZ Give Camp is a great opportunity to build software as a volunteer for others. We come together Friday after work, start to build software for charities that otherwise couldn't afford software services. We start building Friday afternoon. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software back to the charities. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next Daisy Give Camp. Or if you'd like a Give Camp here in your area, hit me up on email or Twitter, and let's get a Give Camp, a volunteer organization, installed in your neighborhood as well. So your technology your way. Our goal is to build that full stack app. We'll have a SPA, a thick client in the browser, and we'll communicate via REST services, JSON services, up to a web server. The web server is going to save some data in the database. And then we have a worker service that is able to communicate over gRPC to get the information that it needs to do to be able to accomplish other tasks. And this is a pattern that we often see in enterprise applications where we have some backend service that needs to do something. Maybe it's communicating directly with the database, or maybe it's communicating with other external services. We'll have a web server that has REST APIs, and we'll have a thick client in the browser. So this is kind of that architecture that we're going to lean on, but we're going to build it twice. Once in .NET, so there's no JavaScript. Once only with JavaScript with no .NET. Everything that we see today is free and open source, works cross-platform on Mac, Windows, and Linux, and uses web standards. So you can dig in for free today. Let's start with the C# and .NET experience. What's really cool is you can build anything in .NET, whether it's a desktop app or a web app or a cloud app, mobile app, gaming, IoT, AI. All of these platforms are available in .NET, and we'll see a great example of it. With .NET, it's cross-platform on Mac, Linux, and Windows if you're building on .NET Core or .NET 5. And you can host the code on GitHub and publish it to Azure or any other cloud, or the edge. What's new in .NET, the worker service template, we'll see that today. gRPC, we'll see that today as well. And full stack development with C# and Razor, where you can build apps in Blazor, a client-side .NET runtime environment. It is really cool. So as we dig into a C# experience here, we'll see this. Blazor, our app running inside the browser, will communicate via JSON services to ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core will save that data in the database. And we'll have a worker service that will be able to communicate via gRPC to know what content it needs to work on. So first up, the front end, the single page application. SPAs are great in that they allow us to build thick clients, really interactive clients in the browser. Now, Blazor has two different mechanisms for doing this. We can create in .NET Core 3.0 a server-side thing where all of the Blazor content lives on the server, and we use SignalR to communicate with the browser. That's interesting. But we can't use this in disconnected scenarios or if our server is not in .NET, because we do need this live SignalR connection. In .NET 5, we have Blazor running in the browser, and it runs on top of WebAssembly. WebAssembly is a browser standard. This wasn't invented by Microsoft, and there are lots of different mechanisms that can run in WebAssembly. We have a .NET runtime inside running inside WebAssembly. And so now we have some Razor components that boot up inside there. Blazor then can run completely disconnected. We can create offline apps. We can create apps that communicate with different servers. This Blazor mechanism running client side on WebAssembly is really cool. And that's what we'll see today. It shipped with .NET 5. So let's dig in with Blazor and Web API. If I come into Visual Studio, I can say File, New Project, and I'll just add this project here. New Project, and I can come in and pick a Blazor app. Here's a Blazor app. As I pick a Blazor app, it will ask me to give it a name. I'll say that's a good name. And then next, it will ask me whether I want to choose a server app or a WebAssembly app. Now, in this case, I chose a WebAssembly app. And here now I can say ASP.NET Core hosted. Once I've said ASP.NET Core web hosted, it will create a few projects. So I'm going to exit out of here, and we'll see the projects that it created. Here's my server. This is my ASP.NET Web API server. And client, here's my Blazor app. So if we dig into our Blazor app, we have what looks like a regular .NET app. Let's see if I can zoom in a smidge. There we go. I have a regular .NET Razor Pages app. So I've got an index page, I've got an about page, a counter, some other content. I have a shared thing that gives me a main layout. I happen to have a nav menu component. It's pretty much a .NET website. You could look at this and say, yeah, that looks a lot like Razor Pages. Here on the server, we have a web API that will be able to communicate with that. So for example, here is an order controller. Now this order controller will has a few methods. I can get orders. It will return the list of orders from my order repository. I can save a new order and just pass in the orders and it'll save that. So then here on my client side page, I can go do that. I can go read all of those orders. Here's refresh orders. So I'm going to go make an AJAX request off to get my orders. And now that I have my orders, much like any Razor page, I can go loop through my orders, building out a table. And this is just regular Razor. And then I have a form here where I can enter in all of the content. Notice that I'm binding various things into this model. And then once I save that order, I'll come down here into the save method, create a new order, post that to the API, and refresh the orders. So let's fire this up. This is particularly cool in that there is no JavaScript, but I still have a front-end thick client, kind of like a React or Vue or Angular app. But this is all .NET. So here's my app. I'm going to pull up the F12 developer tools. And let's look at the network tab. That's pretty cool. I'm loading the WebAssembly pieces. And ultimately, it will boot up my WebAssembly piece. Here's my app. So I'm going to go to my counter. And let's pay attention to these network requests as I run this. I'm not making new web requests. It's all happening client-side in the browser. That's really cool. Here's an example that comes with the browser template. And this one is actually going to get some data from my API. And so I have this regular AJAX request, and it's a GET, and it will ask for some JSON in response. And here's the response. It's all fictitious data, but it's really cool. I'm going to come into this About page, and this About page will go hit this version API. And this version API is just hard-coded to return the details about my server. In this case, my server is a C# ASP.NET Core app running version 5.0.2. If I come in here to the orders page, I can say, I would like some pizza. I would like 3 pizzas, and that'll be a total of 30. Let me save that order. We see that we have this order request where I'm posting off all of the details associated with this order. And then I'm refreshing the orders where it's giving me all of the orders that I have in my system. Now, right now it's in a pending state. That's fine. Let's come back to it. But if I hit refresh orders, I get a new request off to the server. It goes into that API and is able to do the things. That's really cool. We have a thick client in the browser running full .NET, no JavaScript at all. It's running on WebAssembly, and we have REST APIs behind the scenes making this happen. Now we need a service. So let's come into this service. The worker service template is new in .NET Core 3 and allows us to create cross-platform services. much like Windows services on Windows, but these can run on Windows, Linux, or Mac. And the service will take care of all of the things that we need to do as we start and stop things. Here's more details on installing the services in Windows and Linux. As you grab these slides from robrich.org, click through this blue link to be able to dig into those details. We're also going to leverage gRPC. gRPC, short for Google Remote Procedure Call, was invented by Google as a binary mechanism to be able to connect to various services. It uses protocol buffers, and Microsoft has included this now in .NET Core so that you can leverage gRPC with just a NuGet package reference. So here in my application, I'm going to hit stop, and I'm going to say add a new project. And last time we picked Blazor app. This time I'm going to pick worker service. So here's that worker service template that works with .NET Core. Once I dig in and create that project, I will end up with a worker project like this. Now this background service is that base class that implements all of those things to keep my worker running in all the places. I have a static void main, and it looks not that unlike a website. I have included the NuGet packages where I can use Windows Service or use systemd. And if I'm not on that platform, then this is a no-op. It will do nothing. But if I am on Windows, then I can install it as a regular Windows service with SD like I would with any other service. If I'm on Linux, I can use systemd to start this as a regular Linux service. And I can put this in containers as well. Ultimately, it will launch my worker, and here's my worker. Now, in this case, this worker is going to consume this gRPC session. This gRPC session is based on this proto file. Now, here's the proto file. This is gRPC. This isn't C#, but this defines how this mechanism works. So I have two methods, get new order and update order. Get new order takes in a new order request. Here's the new order request. It's blank. And it returns a new order reply. The new order reply has an order ID that is an int32, and it is the first field in this message. The beauty here is that if I add or deprecate fields in my message, I can just give them unique numbers. And so I don't need to say, well, and return a reply. In this case, the reply is empty, but the request has two fields. If I want to add a third field, I give it number 3. And if I want to deprecate one of these fields, I'll leave the numbers as they are and just remove that unused number. So I created here in this server, using that same proto file, a service that is able to hook into that. So here's that orders service. And the order service says, when I get a new order, let me go grab the next pending order. Let me go find a pending order, and I will send that pending order back to the caller. If they want to update the order, I'm going to grab that order ID and that status, and I will save that order into place. So in my worker service, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to say, let me go get the next request that I need to do. And then I'll do stuff. In this case, I'm just going to log that I've done it. And then I'll update that I've processed that order. So that's that worker service where it's just going to go create a gRPC connection and connect to it. So let's spin up our front end again. Here's our web API with our Blazor front end. And now let's also go spin up our backend. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say right click, and I would like to debug, start a new instance. Oh, it's still booting up the other one. Let me let it finish. Okay, worker, debug, start new instance. So the first thing that this will do, it will boot up, and it will go ask the server, what's the next order that I need to do? Oh, it found order ID 1. Now it has no pending orders to do. So back in my front end, I will take a look at my orders, and I can see that this order is processed. I need to buy milk. I want 1 milk, and that will be 100. Let's save that order. And, ooh, we hit a connection fail. Let's refresh the orders, and this order is pending. That's cool. In a second, this order will, this will go fire it up. There's order ID 2, and now it's processed. In .NET, fully in .NET, we created a backend service that communicated via gRPC. We created a front-end service, a front-end SPA, thick client in the browser with Blazor, and we were able to connect those in really elegant ways. Blazor via REST to ASP.NET Core Web API. The worker service template via gRPC to the ASP.NET Core Web API. And all of that saving in the database. No JavaScript required. That's cool. Not only no JavaScript, but this will run on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and can run in containers, both Windows and Linux containers, just fine. That was really cool. Any questions on the C# part before we flip into the script part?
Oh wow, Rob, that was so smooth. I think that is one of the best demos that I've seen that talks about the Blazor and gRPCs. That was pretty clean, and when you definitely go ahead and tell all those JSON responses, I feel that hey, Blazor is something that kind of replaces this Node in JavaScript, guys, right? So that's pretty cool thing. We have a couple of questions coming up. I don't see anything related to JavaScript or Node, but a guy has asked from CSharpCorner forums. He says. REST versus gRPC, when should I choose one over the other?
Good question. gRPC is a binary protocol. And so if you're moving non-text data, gRPC is probably a really good choice. gRPC does require a little bit of hand-holding, and it does have that established proto file. And so if you're just trying to run something really quick, or you have a browser client, then REST is probably a better choice. You can make similar analogies when you were comparing XML SOAP services with JSON services. If you had an XML service and you like that WSDL, you like that schema, then gRPC is a natural evolution to that concern. If you like the freer, less restrictive nature of the JSON services, then REST is a really good point. JSON has kind of become the de facto standard of service definitions, but gRPC is really coming into play. So as long as you can agree in both client and server, then either one can work just fine.
Okay, that definitely makes sense, and I think definitely, as you said, gRPC is not as mature as REST. So still, I think it will go in the coming years, and I think Microsoft is going to invest a lot into this Blazor and gRPC, and it is not going to be the next Silverlight. Okay,
agreed.
So let's. I still have around 4 to 5 questions, Rob. I know, but that's gonna disturb your flow. I'll take one or more questions. Let me know if this makes sense. Can I define a gRPC call with a null request or response?
Yes. And in fact, we did that here. It's not null per se, but if I pop open this proto handler, here in the update order reply, I'm not returning anything. Pretty much a null response. As I come in here to consume it, when I say I would like to await update order async, I'm not grabbing any response. Now, technically, it's not null. Technically, it's actually this update order reply class, but it is effectively a null response, a lack of response.
Yeah, there's nothing there. So yeah, you can say it's null.
Right. But that's kind of the nature of gRPC, is that you're very specifically defining both inputs and outputs for every method. And in this case, I defined the output as blank.
Okay, perfect. That definitely answers. I'll take just one more question, right then, Rob. I think we'll let you go with your presentation. This is I think a question that people may like to know. Everyone, it's a basic question, but yeah, how to get current URL in a Blazor application? I think this is someone who's coming from who's learning Blazor and I just started making application, but how do you go ahead and answer? I think it might get a little complicated because there are many case
How do I
scenarios.
get the current URL? Good question. What's cool is that Blazor is .NET in all the things. So I would turn the question around. How do you get the current request in an MVC app or in a Razor Pages app? Here's what's really cool. That's exactly how you do it in a Blazor app too.
So you can say that if someone comes from a C# or a .NET background, Blazor is just a piece of cake for that person. It's just that Microsoft has taken your knowledge and done all the hard work from behind the scenes, and now you can go ahead and build applications with Blazor. And at the end, behind the scenes, there's all JavaScript compile code that they have done it. So you have already the knowledge. Just go ahead and build this single page application with the Blazor.
Exactly. It
Perfect.
is .NET through and through. If you do need to break out and use some JavaScript in your front end app, you definitely can. And they have a great mechanism of marshaling back and forth between Blazor apps and JavaScript. But you don't need to if you don't want to.
Yeah. But there's some folks in the team, right, who want to plug in some JavaScript here and there.
And I've seen some great places where in the midst of your Blazor app, you have a div that is an Angular microspa. And it's really interesting.
That should be interesting. So we have a few questions. Bob, how do you want to take us later on? Because I see they are more related to GRPC and Blazor. You want us to take it later on, or you want to take it now?
Let's dive into JavaScript and come back to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I'll pull your screen again, and there you go.
Awesome. So we just did this entire app in C#. Let's do this entire app in JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? Well, JavaScript is the only runtime that you can run in a browser now that there is no Flash or Silverlight or Java applets. Well, kind of. Now we've got WebAssembly. But what was really cool is they looked at JavaScript and said, what if we ran the server as JavaScript too? And thus grew Node. Node is a JavaScript web server built on top of Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. So it's the same JavaScript engine that is running in a Chrome browser, but to it, they add sockets. And with sockets, we can now build a web server. And that's really cool. We can read and write files, which you can't do inside Chrome. And we can read and write from WebSockets, which means we can build a web server. So here we have this Node thing. And I love this tweet. Grab this slide from robrich.org and click through to this tweet to get to this exact picture. When we talk about Node, when we say it, we don't say Node.js, or actually when we write it rather, we don't write Node capital J, capital S. We don't write Node.js. We don't just write Node by itself. We write Node, period, lowercase j, lowercase s. When we speak it, we don't say Node.js or Node.js. We just say Node. Now this is weird. We say Node and we write this. Those are different. And those of us less familiar with the Node ecosystem will make the mistake. And so we're quite forgiving. There's lots of people who will write it this way or this way or this way. Lots of people who will say it this way or this way. And we're generally kind to them. But really, if you say it, say Node. And if you write it capital N, period, JS. There's a little culture in Node. So we're going to, what Node has similar to .NET, Node has a Node package manager, NPM. And it's actually not, NPM is no longer an acronym for Node package manager. It's just the package ecosystem. And there's a lot of open source content in NPM. So you can build anything in JavaScript. You can build desktop apps. You can build IoT devices. You can build web servers. You can build gaming. And what's really cool in JavaScript, everything is cross-platform on Mac, Linux, and Windows. You can host it in the cloud on Azure or another cloud. You can host it on the edge. Jeff Atwood has this wonderful quote: any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. That's cool. So here's what we're going to build: a Vue app that communicates via REST to an Express server. So here's our web API, and a Node app that will run on PM2 with gRPC services to that Express app. So let's dig in. We have a front-end application. Now, whether you choose Angular, React, or Vue, they're all built on similar mechanisms: web components, shadow DOM, HTML rendering. As I start off here, I'll say Vue create my app, and it will now interview me. I'll manually select features, and I'll say I would like to turn on TypeScript and progressive web app, and I can choose the things that I want. If I'm using React, I'll use create React app. If I'm using Angular, I'll use Angular scaffolding to be able to build a similar thing. Once I get to that point, I have this app. And here's this app where I start off with this main.js, and it will kick off my primary component here, this app. Now, because I've turned on client-side routing, I have this ability to navigate between pages. Now, I'm not hitting the server for these new pages. I'm just hitting the browser. But for example, here's my home view. Here's my about view. Now, similar to what we did in .NET, I'm going to go ask the server, hey, server, what language are you? Go grab that data and bind it to my UI. What's really cool about Vue is we have these single file components. Here's the HTML piece. Here's the JavaScript piece. And if I need to, I can put content for CSS in this section. Each section excels in the things that they can do, and I can combine them together in really interesting ways. Okay, so here's my front-end API, and let's fire this up. I'm going to jump out of here. Let's fire up the front-end app, npm run serve, and let's fire up the back-end API. Oh, this is npm start. Okay, the backend API is an Express app, and it will not only launch on port 3000, but it'll also launch the gRPC pieces. Now, this backend app is just an Express app where I've launched into the service. Here's that app, and it will grab these two controllers, for lack of a better term, routes. So here's my order route where it does similar things: a get all and an update, or an add rather. And here's that version server. Okay, so let's come into our app, and I will say HTTPS localhost 8443. Well, that server was running on port 3000. How did I get to 8443? Well, here I have my front-end SPA listening on 8443. And the front-end SPA actually here in my Vue config is set to proxy anything that starts with /API to my backend running on port 3000. So here's my app. I'll go to about. It will go hit my server, go get the version details. Here's that response, and we render our response. That's perfect. I'm going to come to orders. I would like some bacon. Nope, I'm going to ask for potatoes. And I'll ask for 3 potatoes. Let's save this order. That's cool. We got a similar experience where I post in this quantity, this content, and then I refresh my orders and get back this response. Here's each of those order details. So we have our front-end application. Now we need a back-end worker service. Well, a back-end worker service is pretty much just a Node app. So I have here a Node app, and this Node app will just launch and do all the things, but I want this Node app to connect over gRPC. So as I process an order, I'm going to go connect to this gRPC service that I've started up here and go do that thing. Now, as with anything, as with any gRPC experience, we have a proto file. You'll notice that this proto definition is pretty much identical to the proto definition we saw in C#. On the server, I have a similar proto definition, and I have a router that implements this, that will, actually, that's not it. It's right here. Here's that server side of the gRPC connection. So as I get a new order, I'm going to go get the next pending order, send that back through my service. If I get an update, then I will update that order. So in my service, I will say, I would like to go get the next order. I will update that order, noting that it's processed. And so let's do exactly that. Here we have our front end running. Let's start our worker. npm start. And now that worker is going to go connect over gRPC, and it just processed order ID 1. Great. So let's come back in here. We'll refresh this, and it's processed. If I ask for sheep, I would like 1,000 sheep. Let's save that order. And straight away, we see that the backend service caught that and processed it right away. That was really cool. Now, what's interesting about this is this stack is complete JavaScript front to back. There is no C#. So I have my Express app. Let me get to that graphic here. I have my Express app running JavaScript. I have my Vue API, or my Vue thick client. I have my worker service that I can choose to run as a service with PM2. And I'll skip over the PM2 parts just for the sake of time. But what's really cool is that we did a lot with JavaScript front to back, and we did a lot with C# front to back. But both of these are completely based on web standards, having a similar API. So I have right here my web server. Let's start up our .NET server. And I have here my JavaScript client and my JavaScript API and my JavaScript client. Let's come in here, and instead of saying proxy off to localhost 3000, let's proxy off to localhost 5001. And for my worker, instead of hooking up to port 3001 for my gRPC, let's hook up to port 5001 for my gRPC. Now I have my Blazor app running. It's still doing what it needs to. If I come here into the About, I see that my server is .NET. Oh, it's going to refresh. But let's also start up our front end, and we'll start up our worker service. If I come in here now to About, we see that our .NET app is running. But if we come in here to our Vue app, and we come here into About, let me refresh it. Now our Vue app is connected to our .NET backend. What is the backend that it's connected to? The C# and ASP.NET Core backend. That is cool. And our web worker is trying to process orders on our C# backend. So let's come in here to orders, and let's say more technology. I'm going to save this order, and now it's pending. My backend is going to come pick up that order, number 3, and I come back to my front end and refresh, and now I see that that's solved. Whether we choose a front end using .NET or Node, whether we choose a backend using .NET or Node, whether we choose a service using .NET or Node, we can optimize for developer joy. And so that's what's really cool here is not there. You can optimize for the tools that make you happy. You can pick a front end that is Blazor if you like C# all the way. Or you can pick a back end that is JavaScript if that's what makes you happy. And this is what's really cool, is each of these pieces is able to solve the solution in really elegant cross-platform ways using web standards. Whether you built it on C# or .NET or JavaScript or Node or Python or Java, choose the technology that makes you happy and best solves the problems that you need.
All right, so Rob, that was great. So I see you did do the same applications both with the Blazor and with the Vue, right? And then you say that all these frameworks are they're based on web standards. It's all up to you. It's depending upon what you want to do. You can use JavaScript for front end. You can use JavaScript from back end. You can use Blazor, GRPC, or what. It's entirely up to you what you want to go ahead and use it. And all these pieces are being built well so that they can communicate with each other. It doesn't matter if it's on Blazor or if it's on JavaScript, right? So that is something I believe
Exactly.
is a very key thing to take away. We don't have many questions for Vue because it's CSharpCorner, right? So let's just put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Let's dig into the C# and
Yeah,
gRPC pieces. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So this one question, I think it's a little detailed one, but I don't know how you can answer this quickly. How can I allow only authorized users to access gRPC service?
That is really cool. Authorization inside gRPC is definitely larger than we have time for, but we can look at how we did this with JSON services and how we did this with XML services as well. There's a couple of techniques that we can do. If you're doing gRPC from a browser, you can have a session cookie and you can validate that session cookie before you can even connect to that socket. And so that can be a great way to do that. If you don't have a browser with a web context available, then you can pass either credentials or a token as part of your gRPC message and validate that on the other side. And so whether you choose to pass in, please don't pass in a username and password every time, but have one service that will authenticate you and return a token, and then use that token to validate in other ways. If you have a web server, you can also do other pieces like basic authentication to authenticate against that web server, or Azure AD to get a token to authenticate through that web server. gRPC is really rich, but the authentication story is still growing. That's a great question.
Yeah, and I see people really love your content. Triori says, thanks, Rob, for amazing presentation. Thank you, Triori, for tuning in. We'll take one question from Atul. He says, how does they do on performance front in case of all JavaScript and all .NET apps?
Good question. The performance of both of these apps is really similar. And in most cases, the thing that you're waiting on is the user to click the button. All of the modern SPA frameworks, React, Angular, and Vue, are now fast enough that probably, unless you're doing really bad things, you can get really elegant performance out of them. Same thing with Blazor. You can lock up the thread with a loop that's computing 30,000 things, but unless you're doing really bad things, you'll have acceptable performance in all cases.
Okay. So yeah, I think it all depends upon your application, right? So they all perform well, and I think it's all up to you. Even if if you feel like, okay, one of the framework works faster, but maybe you're not writing the best code, you're not testing it, so it may not go ahead and work well in the production.
Right.
So definitely, it's all up to you. We'll take a few questions from the forum that we have. Okay, it says this is on Blazor again. How can I show a custom message when a customer's connection is lost with the server? I mean, when the data is lost, when there's no Wi-Fi, maybe in that case.
That is cool. I love it. I'm not sure if you can hook into the connection, but depending on how you choose to connect to the server, if you have a SignalR connection between client and server, then you can handle the connection dropped event and show or hide the message. Without that, if you're using REST services, then you can handle a connection failure inside the REST message and display that message, but you won't necessarily know when you lost connection and when you come back online, short of just polling that connection to ask for something. So if a live connection is really important, I would invite you to move from REST to SignalR and then handle those events to be able to show and hide that message.
Yeah.
Grabbing that message is actually really cool. And then once you have that event, then it's just a matter of setting the display property, display CSS property of that div to just show the message.
Yeah, I think this is very important because these days many single page application or maybe progressive web app, what they do, if they see, okay, you have lost the internet connection, they may pull up some of the memory from your local storage and may show it to you and say,
Right.
hey, this is the data that we have and you are currently offline. So yeah, and even we have seen Google Maps and many other applications doing it. So yeah, I think that is something people are doing a lot
Exactly.
more during clients projects too. What one question, I think this is the only question that I think is probably JavaScript. But again, this is with respect to Blazor. This says, do we have hooks in Blazor?
Do we have hooks in Blazor? That is interesting. Blazor tends to run on an MVVM type of pattern where hooks is more baked into the React ecosystem. Now, if we pull in a Flux store into Blazor, we can create that kind of mechanism towards hooks. But really, in the web components that we build with Blazor, they're a lot simpler than hooks. They're not functional components. They are class-based components. And so we saw the counters increment method. We saw the refresh order method. We have methods inside of our components. So it's not like use state and use effect. You just have regular methods.
So do you mean, Rob, that in hooks, usually if someone is using hooks in Vue, they can actually manage if the data is loaded before the browser, before the page loads, or after, or when it's processed, right? So that's how we can bifurcate it. So isn't that something that we can do with the Blazor?
Oh, good call. Yes, we do have page lifecycle events, and we can definitely hook into when the component is rendered, when the component is attached to it. For example, in our order component, we hooked into when the component was rendered so that we would refresh that order list automatically. We didn't have to wait for the user to push the button. We would grab the list on page load.
Okay, so that makes sense. So Atul goes ahead and asks the same question, but he's saying that is there any specific situation depending upon CPU intense application where you would like to choose between .NET or JavaScript? How do you take that factor to choose between .NET or JavaScript?
Good question. And that is really interesting. When we have a compute heavy workload, JavaScript is single threaded and tends to run on the CPU. So JavaScript is, our node is wonderfully asynchronous. And so if we can call off to a C# compute service, then we might be able to run that slightly faster. JavaScript's computation isn't super speedy. But what's really cool now that we have worker services and web workers, then we can kind of spin that piece off and do that computation. It's fun to see GPUs starting to get exposed to JavaScript as well. And so at that point, we're really paving over that difference. I would say for now, if you have a compute intensive application, C# might be a better choice. But really quickly, that will no longer be the case. And so that's probably not the thing that should decide your technology choice. Instead, look to the skills of your workforce and the passions of your developers and really lean into that, because when they're having fun, they will do really good work. And so at that point, hone into those things and the technology will definitely catch up.
Yep. And that definitely makes sense, Rob. And I think just stick to what you're doing, right? This JavaScript, Blazor, the organizations, open source, they're really investing a lot on it. Whatever it is, just stick to it, and definitely both of the world are best. So it's okay to whatever you stick to. And
Right.
so we'll do it. I know we are almost at time. We are at 56 minutes. We have last 3 to 4 minutes left. Rob, I still have a couple of more questions, right?
Yeah,
Then
definitely. Let's begin.
then we'll okay. This was hooks. Now this is the comparison between Blazor and Vue that says how are session handled in Blazors versus Vue.
Good question. In Vue, I can do session based on local storage. I can just hook into local storage and fill up my Flux store and do all the things, much like I would in React. In Blazor, I can hook into local storage and pull off similar things, but now am I reaching into JavaScript bits? I believe in Blazor they have exposed local storage to us, and so we could just pull it in the same way. But you're right, we're starting to think differently. Usually in Blazor apps, I'll use my session cookie to go ask the server for my refresh state and not lean on the client-side content. Not to say that I couldn't, I just haven't.
When we talk about Blazor, Rob, I think Blazor is still into development, right? It's still very new. Whereas if I compare to Vue, which is, I would say, third in the number of top 3 JavaScript framework, right? I still see people trusting Vue a lot. No doubt the Microsoft community is very vibrant, right? People like to go ahead and explore Blazor. Let me quickly go ahead and ask you and take your feedback that is Blazor good enough to go ahead and put it into production?
Good question. Is Blazor good enough? I would say yes, if you have enough components to do what you need to. And third-party component vendors like Telerik and Component One are definitely ramping up their game and making it good. But the Blazor market is newer. And so you'll find a lot more external components, third-party grids, rendering mechanisms, graphing libraries in a JavaScript ecosystem than in the Blazor ecosystem. Not to say that that won't always be the case, but you're right. Blazor is a newer technology, and so the third-party component ecosystem is not as mature. So if that's really what you need, if you really need this one graphing library that is only available in Vue or React, that might be enough to make that as your technology choice and start to invest in rendering that way. Alternatively, hit up Telerik and say, I would really love to move to Blazor if I had a component like this, and see if they're able to produce it in time.
I think that there are organizations too moving to Blazor, and they're helping a lot. We'll take second last question, Rob. Second last question. We're at 59 minutes, and that is, I think you've already answered it, but let me go ahead and still pull it up. It says, how can I implement policy-based authorization in Blazor?
That is really cool. Policy-based authorization in Blazor. For the most part, I would say that that is likely a server-side concern in most cases. The authorization mechanism, Blazor runs as a client-side SPA, a thick client, in an untrusted environment. Users can hack at their browser and add cookies or change values in cookies. And so you really need to do that security validation piece at the server. At the server, you can do that policy-based authentication. And then I'll often create one controller where I just pull in all those roles. So then in the client-side app, I can, based on those roles, turn features on and off. But again, as I'm pushing each of those buttons in that client-side admin area, I'm validating that the user has the ability to do those features server-side as well. Because any malicious user could change their cookie or change their session variables or adjust things. At that point, if I really, really want my admin experience to be separate from my customer experience, to be separate from my unauthenticated experience, I would build 3 different Blazor apps and host them on different pages in my server, in my web server. Because at that point, they can't even load the Blazor app if they don't have authentication to get to that particular service. Now, that does mean segmenting things. That does mean building 3 times. They may even run on different ports. But at that point, that's the best way to ensure that they are completely separate.
Yeah, that's very well answered. Yeah, it's if you need more authorization and application, you need to go ahead and work a little more on that. So that answer
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. That was the second last question that I was gonna ask you, Rob. One final question that I have that is not at
Yeah.
all technical. I'm gonna spare you with that. Okay, apart I think you have answered almost like 12, 15 questions already, right? So, Rob, you did talk about the entire ecosystem of Blazor, Node. You did mention about JavaScript world, Vue, right? So,
Mhm.
you are an MVP. You do all this stuff. You're a full time developer too, right? You manage team. What do you do apart from all this as your hobby?
Good question. What are my hobbies? I really love technology. I love learning and teaching and sharing. And so my hobbies become learning new technology. I have a couple of days off. Let me go learn the latest thing with Docker and Kubernetes, or let me dig into Blazor, or let me do stuff. My other hobby, my other passion is my family. And so it's
Wow.
really fun to be able to unplug and go play with my kids and be able to do some really cool things there. Um, the passions, the hobbies, the things that drive us. I've been really blessed in that my hobbies have grown into my career, and so to some degree, I haven't worked a day in my life because I've been having fun the whole time. Not
Wow.
quite, but yeah, I really enjoy what I do.
That sounds so positive and happy when you say that spending time with your family is something, kind of hobby. And I think that this lockdown and past 10, 11 months have been a blessing in disguise for us, where we go ahead and work from home and get to spend more time with our family, and just realize
Yeah.
that there's so many things we have taken for granted. Okay. And life is
Oh,
just
most
beyond
definitely.
weekends. Life is just not Saturday, Sundays. It's also from Monday to Friday. So that was an
Yeah.
amazing session, Rob. One of the most interactive and lively session we've ever had on Ask Me Anything. Thank you so much for your time that you have given us today. I, Stephen Simon, on behalf of entire C Sharp Corner community, would like to thank you for contributing to the community, and we would love to have you back once again whenever you're available. So thank you so much,
Most
Rob.
definitely. Thanks for having me on. This was so much fun.
All right, Rob. Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone who was joined too. Yeah, that's important.